Welcome, everyone, to the Youth Law Center and the California Youth Connections webinar on discussing our new major victory for youth in foster care in California around permanent rate structure. All right, so I think we will go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad to be here with you, regardless of whether you are joining us from some part of California. We have a couple of folks who are joining us from out of the state. We're happy that you're spending your morning with us. We are here today to discuss an advocacy victory that we are really excited about. And this is the California Department of Social Services, the Governor of California, and the California Legislature all committing to make sure that our financing structure in foster care supports young people having the support, the family, and the life that we want them to have. So we are going to have a very ambitious agenda to attempt to give you a little bit more information, both about the background of the rates and why we hope that you are excited to start this process of implementation along with us, tell you some of the technical details about the rate structure itself, and then talk with you about some of the components of the rates that we are most excited and believe that will make the most significant difference for young people in foster care. So I'm Jennifer Rodriguez. I'm the Executive Director of the Youth Law Center. Our other presenters today will be Brian Blalock, who's a Senior Directing Attorney here at the Youth Law Center, and Kristina Tanner, who is the Statewide Policy Coordinator for the California Youth Connection. So before I get started here, I want to just encourage everyone who's on to ask questions. Please use the chat to send us questions. We have reserved some time at the end of this webcast to answer some of those questions. I'm sure just based on the number of questions that we have about the process moving forward that we won't have time for all of them, but we will have time for some of them. And we're excited to start this discussion. So just to give you some background here, across California and really across the country, there have been hundreds, if not thousands, of conversations about how we can change our policy, our financing structures, our practice, and our culture to ensure that our amazing children and youth who have to spend part of their childhood in foster care get the things that we know are most important to give them the chance to thrive. And those are the nurturing, enduring relationships with the adults who love them, the opportunities to find the activities that bring them joy, that allow them to heal, that allow them to contribute and to find purpose. Whether those are activities like participating in the California Youth Connection and finding your voice and participating in politics down the line, or running track and being able to work out all of the anger and sadness and grief from your life, whatever those are, we know that those activities are not just critical in terms of this moment, but that they are important developmental foundations and milestones for young people. And this month in July, Governor Gavin Newsom and the California Legislature signed into law a $1 billion investment in our children and youth through revisions to this new permanent foster care rate structure that was designed by the California Department of Social Services to do exactly that. The California Department of Social Services listened very carefully to young people and advocates across the state and had worked hard to create a new way of financing foster care rates that should, one, allow young people to be served in their families and in their communities and to get the supports that were previously only available in institutional care. And then two, to make sure that we are resourcing these kind of activities as a primary intervention in foster care. And we've been working with the California Youth Connection in partnership since the passage of the continuum of care reform here in California in 2015, which now it's been almost 10 years of work to ensure that we are really aligning our services and supports around the strengths and needs of a youth. and making sure that we're changing our policy, changing our practice. And now these rates are our first and best attempt at aligning our financing with this high-level goal. And I do want to say, while rates sound technical, and they are technical, to take you up to why you should be excited about technical, this structure really represents the acknowledgement of the hopes and dreams of thousands of youth advocates in the California Youth Connection over the decades for funding that would incentivize their strengths, would incentivize opportunity, and allow for youth to remain in families in their community. And those of you who work closely with the Youth Law Center, you know that we recently completed a project with CYC and the Institute for the Future called On the Threshold of Change, where we looked at what is needed to prepare youth to thrive by 2035 and firmly establishing a fiscal framework like this one that tries to invest in growing strong children and families rather than responding with appropriate resources only after youth have been so unacceptably failed by adults in foster care that they're in crisis. That's a critical component of this plan. It's critical for youth, it's critical for our communities, it's critical for the health of the system. So we really believe this billion-dollar investment in California's children and youth in foster care is going to stack the odds in favor of them through ensuring access for these enrichment and extracurricular activities, the things that we hope will build character, self-confidence, and support healthy transitions to adulthood. This is really first of its kind in the country, this type of financing as a core part of the foster care rate for these strength-building activities. And in addition to that, this new rate structure, we hope will allow youth and family settings to be getting all of the kind of supports that were previously considered really only options for young people who were in group homes or in California, STRTPs. So this, we hope, while technical, we hope it is key to making sure that youth can get the support to be with their own relatives that and resource families and in their communities. And we're especially excited by this accomplishment because in addition to young people identifying this as core, this initial idea for financing extracurricular activities as a core part of the way that we fund foster care was hatched during a convening of youth, resource families, kin, agency staff during a convening of our Quality Parenting Initiative counties in 2017 in Sacramento. We were focused on how to ensure that youth had normal experiences, and the youth and families and staff who were committed to this goal of every youth getting excellent parenting identified this as a core next step that was needed. Those conversations led to our 2019 publication of a special report closing the extracurriculars gap that we updated and reissued out in 2022 that made this case for action to ensure that young people in foster care would have access to these activities. So I think that's the background that you need to understand why we are excited about it, the pieces of this that we feel like are really going to be transformational if we are able to implement them correctly. And before I turn it over to Brian to start walking you through some of the technical pieces, I just want to say we are incredibly grateful to the California Department of Social Services, to the California Legislature, and to Governor Newsom for making such a bold investment in our most vulnerable youth, even when the budget has been incredibly challenging this year. We believe it is always the right time to make this kind of investment in our children and youth and to be really putting in money so that we can make sure they have the futures they deserve. So Brian, I will turn this over to you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks so much. When Jennifer says technical, that means to me complicated, because this is complicated, and potentially incredibly boring. So I have the unenviable task of talking about this process, this rate structure, giving enough information so we kind of know what we're talking about, so then we can talk about what it means for young people without giving so much information that 6 hours later you're wondering why I'm still talking. So I'm going to do my best there. So I'm going to do a very brief analysis of the new rate structure. I'm going to ask everybody to come dream with me a little bit. And when I say dream, I want help us imagine what a finance funding structure scheme would look like for children in out-of-home care in the state of California that meets our values. And when I say our values, I'll just be very, very open. These are our values at the Youth Law Center, that the priority of the foster care system is for children to be able to be safely at home with family. That's a requirement, state law and federal law. Again, the reason I'm not going to be still talking in 6 months, 6 hours or 6 months is I'm not going to give you all the legal sites, but I can, if you're interested, email me. I would love to. Second is that older youth have a right to independence. Their voice should be center in what's happening with them and not just to them. And they should be able to collaborate, but also have independence in how they're living their life. And young people should be able to receive support when they need it, where they need it, however they need it. And that should include access to services in the community with families or in independent living settings. Young people should never have to move to other placements or institutions just to receive care that they need that they could otherwise receive in the community if the system had built out those services. So I say all of that because when I look at the new foster care rate structure, I see a lot of these things. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And a lot more of those things that could be actualized by the rate structure depending upon implementation. So the new foster care rate structure, generally, I want to flag, it was the result of a multi-year process, many work groups, more than 30 and listening sessions with the state. That also made it, I think, incredibly difficult to craft in a way where somebody didn't feel like their best idea was cut out. That's tough because you got a lot of cooks in the kitchen who are contributing to the recipe. But what we did see is CDSS being very responsive to feedback from providers, from counties, and obviously what we deeply care about, especially from young people and caregivers. I really believe when the public sector is not being responsive to the youth and the individuals they serve, they should be called out and held accountable. The flip side of that is when they are responsive, I think we should praise them. And so I want to give a shout out to the state for bringing it. We can see a lot of the proposals and the feedback, especially from youth and caregivers in this final proposal. So the permanent foster care rate structure, here's the numbers. If you've been to CDSS webinars as they were talking about it, this will look very familiar. They came up with this. The way that they came up with it is they used the CANS analysis. Every single young person in out-of-home care receives a CANS. And then they did something called a latent class analysis, which the 6-hour version of this we could talk about from a statistics perspective, exactly what that means. But I would probably have to bring somebody in because I'm a lawyer, not a statistician. But they looked at the latent class analysis and then grouped individuals, grouped the children that are in care, their data based upon buckets or tiers. And I think in different parts in the work group, they talked about a different number of tiers. What they ended up doing is basically 3 tiers plus 1. And so if you see the tiers, it's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and then there's an extra tier for 0 to 5-year-olds who have higher level needs. And then you'll see that they broke apart the foster care benefit into a couple of different pieces. There's the care and supervision. That's part of the AFDCFC or the foster care benefit now. That's 4E leverageable. That's the federal foster care benefit. And then also, if the young person is in an STRTP or an FFA, there's an admin component. You'll see that's the green at the bottom. And then they added 2 different components that are brand new, that did not exist before in the foster care benefit and is outside of the 4E part of the foster care benefit: strength building and maintenance and immediate needs. I should also point out too, in the proposal, all the care and supervision sees a slight bump, even if you include like where it would be anticipated to be when it's rolled out based upon the CNI or the COLA increase. And so all of the benefits there, the care and supervision goes up a little bit as well. So kind of high level opportunities. So what we see when we look at this rates is it creates a rate for the first time that's based on the strengths and needs of young people. And I'm going to say strengths. That's part of the feedback the state has gotten is we need the foster care system and the way it runs and the way it's funded not to be only deficit based. It needs to be strength based, based upon what the young people and caregivers, what strengths they have. It provides funding to go directly to what a young person wants and needs, regardless of placement. For the first time ever, there's a piece of the benefit that would go to a young person, even if they're not in a placement at all. You might ask when that might happen. Well, for example, if a young person is experience crisis and out of placement instability, and then is in an emergency placement for a short period, but also, and I see in the participant list, there's people here from legal aid who can tell you all the stories, especially older young people who, for whatever reason, they can't be in a placement or they don't feel comfortable there, and then they end up on the street or in a runaway and homeless youth shelter. This would allow them still to be able to access money to get what they need or while they're in that period of crisis. It also provides incentives for county, state, and children's mental health to de-silo, collaborate, and build things. And the trailer bill language, the final trailer bill language, has some very specifics about that I'll flag when we get to the immediate needs money. But also, I just want to flag part of the responsiveness of the state is that continuum of care reform did a lot of really good things that got the outcomes that the state said that they wanted. For example, it funded kinship care in a different way. It increased the money that would go to kin, or for the first time, some relatives got foster care funding for the first time ever. And so continuum of care did that. And as a result, you see an increase in predominant kin placements in California, about 47%. You see an increase of first-time kin placements. That is good, good, good. It also created a structure for the delivery of community-based community-based mental health supports for all young people in care through child and family teams and through the KDA settlement or the Pathway to Wellbeing Services, but it didn't really fund it with new money. And so I'm going to say that didn't work so well. And what this does is it provides money for that to finally adequately fund it. Okay, just a few more things. The extracurriculars and strengths, this is the strength-based and the rates. This is a brand new piece. Our assessment of it is it would probably be about $340 million investment annually that would go directly to young people and caregivers, not based on placement or even being in a placement at all. The funding based upon the final trailer bill makes explicit that this strength building money, if it's a non-minor dependent living independently in a SILP, the money would just go directly to the non-minor dependent. They wouldn't have to do anything or any additional administrative things in order to show what they're purchasing, for example. This has long been an adamant request to the state, especially from CYC and Youth Law Center, and Kristina is going to talk about that in just a minute. The state stepped up and made this happen in a way that was adequate, which is unheard of, based upon all of the decades-long advocacy that we have been doing and that CYC has been leading to try to get this to happen, to get funding for a young person's strengths and extracurriculars and have young people be able to direct where that money goes. The second one is that immediate needs money that finally provides that appropriate level of money for community-based supports. This fills the gap that continuum of care really left from a funding perspective. We think this would be about an annual investment of $216 million, but with a huge asterisk because this money can and should be used to leverage Medicaid. Some percentage of it should be able to leverage Medicaid in order to build out wraparound all over the state of California. I have to say there's already some innovative and progressive counties that are already building tiered community-based wraparound projects using funding that they have now to bridge over until this is able to launch because they see that it's the right thing to do, but it's also what young people and families are asking for. And so this will provide that ability for the counties to finally build out that community-based supports and wraparound that young people will need. This also allows young people who've been identified as having more complex needs to be able to stay at home with family and get the amount of funding they would need to make that happen. Before, that highest level of funding was really only available to STRTPs. Now it's going to allow FFAs to really build innovative models with adequate funding or more adequate funding to build those models out with family. And then the last thing I'll say, which is a huge issue if you talk in a lot of counties on the ground, is an emergency placement issue. Part of it is the fact that there's some child welfare systems that do not have the community-based supports that they need in order to prevent the need for emergency placements at all. This would help get to that and help counties build out those emergency placements or prevention of emergency placements by really wrapping young people with kin and in families, and also building those expanded community-based supports and alternative placements as well. Okay, I hope that I didn't put you to sleep. and it's not 6 hours later. So I'm going to say that I'm successful because I'm going to be kind to myself and have a low bar today. And I'm going to pass it over to Kristina.
Perfect. Thank you, Brian. So how are young people's voices really used to help create the strength building dollar portion of the rate structure and the rate structure in totality, right? Young people in foster care through organizations like California Youth Connection and within our partnership with the Youth Law Center have really consistently voiced our needs to the challenges in regards to lacking the access to enrichment activities. They have shared personal stories and experiencing, highlighting how these activities can significantly impact their lives. Their advocacy efforts, including testifying at hearings, participating in policy discussions, engaging with lawmakers to try to create funding streams that are just for enrichment activities, not, thrown in with a whole bunch of other things it can be used for, and it be really falling to the last thing that funding is used for. We're really seeing that young people were at the state on a quarterly basis telling the state, hey, we know we need enrichment activities. We want young people to have access to it. We have the right to access, right? So why aren't we being able to access it? Why is monetary value and money being the issue en route to us not being able to participate? This grassroots advocacy really shaped the proposal that prioritizes youth strengths and needs rather than just placement types, and really including that strength building dollars portion. So since 2016, we have been partnering with the Youth Law Center to really build out what can enrichment activities look like for young people, and how can we use these as alternative treatments, holistic healing options for young people to really heal from the trauma that they've been through. And so this is a really big win. We are really happy that the strength building dollars got put in so that young people have access to at least $500 a month to really utilize that for any enriching activity that's going to enrich their lives. And that may look different for everybody. So it's not just limited to these school-based activities or just, the traditional activities that we really think of, but it could be anything that a young person wants to be a part of, and it really lets them to find their passions and talents. So what does this mean for foster youth, right? So how is this really going to impact foster youth having the strength building dollars? For many foster youth, these activities are a gateway to discovering their passions and talents, whether that's through sports, music, arts, or other hobbies. Engaging in these activities allow them to explore their interests and develop a sense of identity. The proposed structure will facilitate the building of positive relationships. Enrichment activities often involve interaction with peers, mentors, coaches, creating opportunities for youth to really form meaningful connections. And these relationships can provide a network of support and guidance, helping youth navigate the challenges of foster care and beyond. For many, these connections can become lifelong sources of encouragement and stability. The focus on strengths and needs means the support system will be more individualized and responsive. Instead of this one-size-fits-all approach, this new structure will tailor resources to each youth's unique circumstances and aspirations. These personalized supports will ensure that all youth, regardless of their background or placement, will have the opportunity to reach their full potential. It will create an environment where their voices are heard and their needs are met, fostering a sense of empowerment and agency. Overall, the rate structure will empower foster youth to really thrive and lead fulfilling lives. It will equip them with tools and opportunities they need to be successful, both in the present and in the future. By investing in their strengths and addressing their needs, the system will create a foundation for lifelong success and happiness. This transformative change will benefit not only the youth themselves, but also the families and the communities and society as a whole. So why are enrichment activities so important for young people? Why are these activities seen as vital for youth? Because they provide opportunities for personal growth, skill development, and emotional stability. These activities allow foster youth to explore their interests, build self-esteem, and meaningful connections with peers and mentors. Participating in sports, music, arts, and other hobbies can really help develop youth's resilience, leadership, teamwork skills, and are crucial for their overall well-being and future success. So, in the process since 2016 of working with YLC and CYC and really partnering and really wanting to understand why there's barriers to access to enrichment activities. I've shared my story multiple times, but I'm going to again today. In my time in care, I experienced foster care myself for 13 years, and I had the opportunity to play basketball while I was in foster care. And this experience was truly transformative for me. Growing up in the foster care system often met with dealing with instability and lack of consistent support, but basketball provided me a much needed anchor in my life. Through basketball, I gained essential life skills that were not taught to me through foster care. The sport taught me about teamwork, discipline, and perseverance. It also taught me that in a structured environment where I can channel my energy and focus on something positive. These were not skills just for the court. They were fundamental building blocks for my success in life. The relationships I built through basketball were equally important. My coach was not just a mentor of the sport, but they became a role model and figure of stability in my life. They showed me what healthy relationships look like, demonstrating trust, respect, and commitment. The lifelong connections I made with teammates and coaches created a support network that I could lean on during challenging times. The skills I developed on the court, resilience, strategic thinking, and the ability to work well with others have carried over into my adult life, helping me navigate various challenges and opportunities. Basketball didn't just teach me how to play a game, it equipped me with the tools I needed to build a successful and fulfilling future. Overall, basketball for me was more than just a sport. It was a lifeline. It gave me stability, taught me essential life skills, and helped me form healthy relationships, and provided me a way to work through my trauma that wasn't in the traditional way. Without it, I wouldn't be where I am today. And with that, I'm going to pass it back over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Kristina. I think that was an amazing testimony to why this is so important. I will have you know, Kristina was our co-author on our first extracurricular report, Still in Care at that time. And for those of you who know Kristina and didn't know Kristina was a hooper, it is part of what gives her the strength, the competitiveness, the drive to do the advocacy work. And it is truly amazing. I will say one of my absolute favorite opportunities to participate and support the California Youth Connections Day at the Capitol was one where all of the youth were going in and educating legislators around the activities that made them who they are today. And it wouldn't be a surprise to any of you who have children who love it, you love in their life, but the power of sports, the power of music, the power of cultural activities in shaping who you see yourself as is so incredible. So it's amazing that we're going to be able to resource these activities. So I want to just take us to what our next steps are. Part of the reason we wanted to do this webcast today is because the road ahead is going to require each of you participating in the implementation process so that we can make sure that the vision that we have for how this new rate structure can be transformative actually can operationalize at the county level and make a real difference in the lives of children and youth. So just quickly, each of us is going to talk about one thing that we think absolutely has to happen for implementation going forward to make sure that this fulfills its promise. We have a couple of years to work on implementation, which sounds like a long time on one hand, because I think all of us want these resources and supports to be in place yesterday, but on the other hand is a relatively short period of time to answer all of the big questions around how we really build the structures that are going to support this these new rates, especially when they don't currently exist. So I want to just emphasize that I think that the passage of this permanent rate structure is not the end, but it is really the beginning of a process to figure out all of the unanswered questions, to make sure that we are building in accountability into the system to our youth and families. So frequently the accountability that we have is not to our young people and families, and that's what is going to be the measure of success for us on this effort. We know that CDSS really wants to make this work successful. They want it to be successful. They want it to work for youth and families, but that is going to require the people who are at the ground level to be involved with this. So we're hoping that each of you can share with your peers also that you should be involved in implementation. No matter how complicated, complex, technical any of this is, there is a place where your feedback is going to be so important. We are committing at the Youth Law Center to share information out, whether you are part of our advocacy network, of our legal services network, of our youth organization network. We're committing to sharing information out with you about what opportunities exist to be a part of the implementation process. And we will also be taking your ideas and your feedback back. Brian mentioned that post CCR, what the win was really, new resources for kin. I would say the other win was a restriction on the use of institutional care. But what we know is when you do these things on paper without really building out the systems in a thoughtful way, oftentimes the effort just doesn't have the result that you want. And so we need everyone in the community to sort of be a part of thinking through how can we make sure that this is the transformational moment that we know it can be. So Brian, I will turn it over to you. Tip for implementation.
Thanks, Jennifer. I have a lot of thoughts, especially on the extracurricular side. All to say that the state has started this process and has been going through this process, really listening to young people and families and being responsive. They have to continue doing that. I think that's so important to the success. But I'll focus kind of my next steps on, fitting with my role in this webinar. A little bit of a technical thing is that the state has done a ton of work to set up the structure in the trailer bill language that passed. They now have work to do, and the actual funding in this budget, in this particular budget to be spent right now, is around automation, because they have to build a system that can actually spend the benefit money in this new way that's structured. But there's also more things for the state to do that will increase the likelihood that this will be a successful reform on the county level. And the thing that really stands out to me on the immediate needs side is this real need to create a case rate or some sort of bundled rate that very easily allows for matching of Medicaid dollars, for that match to occur, if possible, on the state level, so then counties can pull it down and do county contracts for wraparound. That allows the immediate needs money to go further, but it also just allows the state to create a structure where then they will make it easier for counties to build the things that they need. And honestly, it'll make it easier for us advocates as we're working with the counties to help the counties or convince them to build this, because it'll just make it easier and more streamlined to build those programs that young people need in their families. And I'll pass it on to Kristina. Perfect.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, so I think the biggest key that is going to provide success in implementation is going to be making sure that we're keeping the true intention of why we created this proposal to begin with. And that means that we have to keep youth at the center and the forefront when we're talking and making changes and doing and making any type of progress in implementation. Young people have to be at the center of that. That'll also ensure that there is accountability across the state for youth, right? So we're not just talking about one agency, one county, one individual talking to one young person that has lived experience. We're talking about over all jurisdictions, over all counties. Young people need to be engaged in this process of implementation. And, the state has, again, really done that. So shout out to the state for really making sure young people's voices are heard and in the center of this. But again, in the implementation, that's going to need to have counties. It's going to need to have everybody really putting youth at the forefront and at the center of this. And in order for us to really create this future and make it into a reality and have this really work in a strength-based way, we need everybody, not just child welfare. We need behavioral health. We need the local communities. We need funders. We need everybody to come in and really embrace this new future and really implement it in the right ways, so that we don't see a lot of the gaps that we see in things that haven't been implemented in the right ways with the true intention of why they were created in the first place. And so with this, it is up to all of you to make this a reality for us, right? We can only do so much. YLC could do so much, CYC, young people, but we need everybody to work together to make this a reality for everyone. So now it's time to pass the baton on to you all, and it's time for you all to move this work forward with us and in partnership. And we look forward to working with you.
Thank you so much, Kristina. And I think what Brian says is 1,000% accurate. Each of us could probably spend an entire hour talking about all of the things we're already focused on in implementation and the things that we feel like are critical. But you're hearing at the highest level what we know to be true, which is having young people involved in this from every county, every organization, having their voices be heard, ensuring that we really are thinking about the very technical and concrete structures that are going to operationalize this, making sure that the accountability goes to young people, and most importantly, remembering the why, on why this matters, that this is a core part of this vision towards moving the system away from focusing on institutions and towards young people being in families, and really rethinking what youth need to thrive, that an intervention is not simply behavioral health, as we've traditionally thought about behavioral health, but that a much more holistic definition of behavioral health that goes with what Kristina talked about, being out, learning to be strategic, resilient, learning how to lose on the court and dust yourself off and pick yourself back up again, that all of those things are just as important for behavioral health. So please send us your questions. We have one great question to kick us off, which is, I'm going to direct this at you first, Brian. Can you talk about how this rate implementation can be supported by CalAIM and CYBHI, and how are you looking at these efforts being linked?
Yeah, I love that question. And yes, linked, overlapping, same. For those of you not as familiar, so California has kind of launched on an unprecedented investment in healthcare reform through CalAIM and the California Youth Behavioral Health Initiative, or CYBHI, and ESSER. And there's lots to say about that, but I'll say specifically about these rates, two big things. One is I see part of these rates and what can happen with the immediate needs dollars, especially, again, there's a development of that case rate and that payment on the state level. Part of that is in, I think, response to some of the things that have happened with payment reform as part of CalAIM, where what we hear from some providers is the loss of ability to be able to bill for things like travel is undermining their ability to go out in the community and look for young people. And so that's the opposite of what I think we all wanted to see happen with payment reform, kind of using the immediate needs dollars as buffer, but also creating a bundled case rate so that those outreach efforts and that travel and transportation can be baked into that amount is a good way to counteract, I think, that unforeseen impact on some providers in some of the counties. But the second thing is this real opportunity to build out wraparound and fund it adequately on the ground. And so one of the things that the CalAIM initiative did is it changed the access criteria for access to specialty mental health services. It moved California from what was predominantly on the ground, a diagnostic-based model, which means you really needed to be diagnosed and thought to have a mental illness before you could access a service. As Jennifer just said, that's not what young people need. It's what some young people need, but it's stigmatizing and it's uncomfortable, and it's not the way that mental health works. And it shouldn't be how mental health works in the modern age. And so what CalAIM does is it switches that to a trauma-based model and changes access criteria and says you don't need a diagnosis. What you need is whether or not you evaluated to being high risk on a trauma scale. And in addition to that, the state is going to presumptively say that you're eligible for a service if you've been in the child welfare system, the juvenile justice system, or experienced homelessness. Because if you went into those systems, the things that precipitated you going into those systems probably means that there was trauma, or the systems themselves have traumatized you so much that we want to be sure that you have access to a Medicaid service to help work through that. And so that's huge. But what the state didn't do is they didn't provide sufficient, adequate, non-federal dollars to be sure that grows out. And so he gets back to that continuum of care reform that I was mentioning, like we created the structure for CFTs and all this great work to provide community-based services, but there was no money that went into it to really fund it. This is kind of the same thing. So this change happened 2.5 years ago. And in some counties, you see expansion of services. You see some counties providing automatic access to things like intensive care coordination for every youth that comes in child welfare. But you see it not happening in others. And part of that, we think, is because they don't have access to that money. Because remember, if it's a Medicaid funded service, you still need $1 of non-Medicaid to unlock $1 of Medicaid. This would provide that and help those counties really build out those Medicaids on the ground. The second thing I'll say, and this is, then I'll stop, is CalAIM also created, it makes it much easier for new provider categories to be able to be built, to be added to the wraparound team. And so that includes family peers, it includes youth peers, it includes behavioral health coaches, like non-clinicians. And when you talk to young people, I have to say, well, we hear back, I don't necessarily need a clinician, but I could use somebody to talk to, and especially somebody to talk to who's been through my stuff, who's been through similar things. You're much more likely to find that if it's a non-clinician who's like been hired from with lived experience and lived wisdom in order to provide that. CalAIM makes that much easier, and now that can be added to a wraparound team, and we hope it's part of the wraparound model with the immediate needs dollars that the state is building.
Thank you, Brian. So I think we're going to have time for maybe 2 more questions here. One question that I think is important in the chat, which is how are Black, Latino, Native youth as the largest group impacted by child welfare policy, children and families going to be impacted? And this is where I think it's important to go back to this as a way of operationalizing CCR. We know that by and large, this population of youth of color are the youth that end up getting institutionalized and spending typically their adolescence in group care. The system becomes less and less able and has less and less resources to sort of deal with being able to support them with healthy adolescent development as they grow older. So we are really hopeful that by making sure that families are resourced, and particularly their own kin, to be able to provide them the supports necessary to live in their own home, in their own community. And as Brian points out, there is a real workforce problem in behavioral health. And so for many of these youth, being able to participate in more holistic, as Kristina called it, non-traditional behavioral health activities, it's going to be more effective to go to boxing than necessarily to go to anger management class, more effective to go to a cultural healing circle than to be seeing a psychotherapist once a week. So there are lots more opportunities to serve our youth in culturally appropriate ways and to make sure they can be at home with their community. And Kristina, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think that you hit on every piece that was really important to hit on. And, I think at the end of the day, this is really going to lead young people to be able to get their needs met wherever they're at. And, they don't have to be placed in higher levels of care. They don't have to be placed in institutional facilities, but rather they can have their needs met in a family-based setting, which is the goal for everyone who is in care, but specifically youth that are already more prone to being in those pipelines. And so I think you hit right on it, Jennifer.
Great. So I see a bunch of questions in the chat. I'm going to go to what I think is the big question, which is, Brian, can I turn over to you to say, how long specifically is it going to take for the new rate structure to come online? Who will be the agencies that are responsible? And what does the implementation process between now and the new rate structure coming online look like? And where are there opportunities for people to plug in and how?
Great, thank you. And this is part of our call to the state. So before, remember I mentioned in planning for the rates, there was 30+ work group meetings, publicized, everything was transparent about the process. We all hope the state does the same thing going forward with implementation. That is what they said they are doing. And so that's what we can expect, is to start seeing work groups on various aspects of the rates being convened so they can get stakeholder input and information about how to implement. And so I would say take a look, and we'll do our best to get that information out as well on our web pages or out to our networks so that people are aware and can come join us in participating and being part of that. Right now, the actual budget amount that was allocated and going to be spent this year is for automation. And so that's part of what the state is focused on, is to be sure they have a CYC system that's able to distribute the benefits and the money. Right now in the trailer bill language, the implementation, I think, was pushed 1 year to the idea is it'll start in 2026. I hope, and if the state gets ready before then, they can implement faster than that. I think that actually should be a call that we have for the state, is that they are convening the work groups and and if they're ready to go. I'm of a fan that I don't think there's a way to get this perfect before it launches. And so instead of trying to make that happen and then deal with the inevitable problems and hiccups, launch sooner and then deal with the inevitable problems and hiccups by providing mechanisms for quality assurance and also feedback from young people and families so they can tell the system how it's working in a transparent way and the state can continue to iterate and fix it.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I mean, I think it's important to manage expectations in that way. We're building something that doesn't currently exist. And quite honestly, there are some models that are relevant, but there is no model that is perfect that we can sort of adopt and learn from. And there are many large sector-wide problems that we're going to have to figure out workarounds to. So I think I always remind people of what folks say around when you're building something new, that at the beginning it seems impossible, in the middle of it it's a disaster, and at the end you can't really imagine how life was ever some way different, how we ever existed in a different way. So I hope everyone will also really commit to being a part of making this work. So we are at time, a little bit over. Thank you all for your patience. I know there were additional questions. We will try to follow up individually with folks by email. Feel free to reach out to us as well. And we will push out a fact sheet with some questions and answers around the implementation process and some frequently asked questions as part of our commitment to you all. We'll also be creating a dedicated web page where we'll put the link to this recording, the PowerPoint that was used today, and additional information as it comes online. Please, if you haven't already, you can follow our LinkedIn page and we'll make sure that that information is there as well. I just want to thank you all, and I want to give a special thanks out to Kristina and the whole California Youth Connection Youth Advocacy community. You are really so much of the reason why both CDSS, the legislature, and the governor understood the urgency of making this kind of investment in a really difficult budget year. So thank you for all that you do.